The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not representative of the opinions and doctrine of Morris Community Church. We reserve the right to change our minds, and we reserve the right to be wrong. Gordon? Welcome, everyone, to the Roasted Christian Podcast. This is Bobby.
I'm John, here at the Roasted Christian. We like our ideas the way we like our coffee roasted.
Roasted! We're moving fast because we actually just completed an interview that we're going to splice in at the end here. And it went not long, but it was great. It's just now our timetables have changed, and so we got to kind of roll here. But thank you for all the listeners who are joining in. Episode 5, Season 2. We're going to be talking about singles and singles in the church and how the church has handled singles. Handling is probably the...
Singles are problems that need to be fixed.
Yeah, we need to be handled.
Right,
we need
Bob?
to handle this problem of singles. Yep. But we have a special guest, Sara Heutink.
Heutink?
Tink, dang it, I said it wrong again. Heutink. She'll be joining us at the Fresh Roast section to be talking about singles and her experience and what the church can be doing differently with singles. But before we jump into that, is there anything that we need to chit-chat about? What's on your mind, heart?
I wrote down the chit-chat. I've heard it less this year, probably because there's other far more important things happening in a political scale, in a social scale, whatever. But usually about this time of year, there's a few complaints that surface about Minnesota and its weather. Okay. And it's coming from Minnesota residents. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I have always talked about this. It's like, okay, so like, what's the deal with this? Like, you complain about snow, and it like you live here, and maybe you didn't choose to live here, maybe you grew up here or whatever. But so I've been thinking, noodling in my brain, like I think unless specifically called to a place that you don't super enjoy, that you should live where you love, or at least learn to love where you're at. Yeah. So my question is, do we actually hate Minnesota, or do we just like complaining?
Ooh, Minnesota's always good at complaining.
Yeah.
More specifically, I think is actually good at finding the one thing that's good amongst all of the complaints. Okay. So like when we talk about weather, we're like, oh, how's it going? Oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. All these things are bad, but it's not windy today. You know, like, like we'll find like the one thing that's good, but we'll still talk about all the bad things.
Right. I mean, it snowed a foot, but at least it's not 20 below.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe there's an element of, if I can talk, I know I can talk to anybody about the thing everybody hates. Like,
sure.
Man, everybody hates how cold it is. Isn't it cold enough for you? Like, you get that question. Cold enough for you? Right. And you're like, well, there's some good comedy sketches about cold enough for you. But, there.
Because I don't know. For me, like, winter can get a little long sometimes. But I definitely enjoy it. And I look forward to snow. Like,
see, I don't.
Even transitioning to like adulthood, where I have to take care of snow and like drive in snow, like I still like snow.
Yeah, I'm totally cool with no snow. Yeah, I mean, because we've had even just living in Morris, kind of like the first 6-7 years, very snowy winters, very icy. I think the main thing of what I don't like about snow is just travel.
Yeah,
that's probably the number one thing I don't like. I love it when it is 30 degrees and a lot of snow on the ground, but the roads are perfect.
Right. Yeah.
Like, to me, that is the optimal kind of winter, because people who enjoy winter things can go out and do their winter things, and then I don't have to hear them complain about not doing their winter things.
Yep.
So yeah, sure, all the snow, and I get to play with my kids in the snow. The kids love the snow, so going out and wrestling with them in the snow, that's fun. I like that, but just give me clean roads. Like, if I can have clean roads, then I'm a very, very, very happy guy.
All right.
That's what I don't like about, especially out here in Western Minnesota, how much the wind blows, the ice, you'll get icy roads. You get those, what do they call those things that come out from the side?
Drifts?
The drifts, but they give them a specific name that you're the finger. What are those things?
What
do you call those?
They might be finger drifts.
Yeah, would that come out from the sides of the roads? Someone write down what the name of this is on Facebook. Please.
Yeah, they're only like a couple feet wide, but then they like freeze really hard, and it's like a speed bump.
It's like a speed bump in the road because of snow. Gabe's looking it up, as a good producer should.
Dang, what are those called? I don't know. So I guess my question is, do we, because I feel like there's great things about Minnesota.
Absolutely.
And maybe everybody thinks that and we just like complaining. But my question is, are people living in a place that they just tolerate? And if so, that would suck.
I think there are probably a smaller percentage of people who are like that. But there's probably percentages of people who are like that everywhere. So like people in San Diego who are like 72, it's like, it's the same all the time. I want variety.
Right.
Like, okay, well, we can't make anybody happy. So,
well, that's true.
Not can't make anybody happy. Can't make everybody happy. Can't make anybody. Nobody's happy. I mean, I love Minnesota. I think because there are days that make even the bad days worth it.
Sure.
And that's what's great about Minnesota. If you live in a place where there's never a good day, like, complain all you want, like, and especially if you're like you have to be there, then it's like, you know what, I feel for you. The people who live in like the ice mountains of like the North Pole,
those ice mountains.
Well, I watched a video about how there are locations around the world that are seed banks that are literally a bank where places throughout the world deposit their seeds for different plant life, vegetation, foods and stuff like that. And they have these places deep within mountains that are extremely cold, but the temperature rarely ever changes because you're deep in the earth, into the mountains. And it's 20, 30 below Fahrenheit in these areas all the time. Dang. So there's no like, these people who work at these places, it's cold all the time. There's no not cold. So that's why I say it. I'd feel for those people. As you're Pokemoning while we're talking, oh my goodness.
So for any potentially far-flung listeners, do you live in a place that you just tolerate, or have you learned to love the place you're at? And does that really matter at all in the long run?
Yeah.
Or do we just live places and who cares?
Do we just, Barrett. All right. Now
some people do live in Barrett, but I don't know if any live that listen to
Waka
us.
Waka. Right. Well, that's a little chit chat, so that way we can keep rolling here. John, I'm going to hold hands with, ceremonially with the listeners here. Not ceremonially, but like
symbolically.
Symbolically, I'm symbolically holding hands with listeners everywhere as we join together and migrate towards John's Coffee Corner.
So today in the Coffee Corner, first off, we're drinking more of the Kenya Peaberry.
I like it.
I kept it a little less strong, so I think actually some of the flavor is more.
Yep, I was going to say it
on top.
Yeah.
And I roasted it in my basement because I got an air purifier.
Ooh.
I'm not sure how well it works.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I went down
Johanna
there today,
the smell is.
And it still is a little smelly.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if I need a better filter or if I need a better system or if...
You need like an air exchanger. You need to put a hole in the wall.
Yeah, something. I don't know. I mean, our house is like, it's relatively loose and open, so like air comes through. But so that remains to be seen if that's a workable deal. But I did order more coffee from Sweet Maria's, so I'm hoping to try and roast throughout the winter.
Cool.
Yeah.
You got encouraged by our listener, Mr. Rick Sorensen.
Sunstrom.
Yeah. Sorensen. Rick Sunstrom.
A little bit. Rick. Yeah. I guess thinking of like caribou prices in the wintertime is just depressing. And thinking of expired coffee in the wintertime is also depressing. So we'll give it a shot, see how we do. Today, the Coffee Corner is about grinders, which is a little out of order. We apologize for that. But there's two basic kinds of grinders. There's a blade grinder and a burr grinder. And this is all assuming that you get whole bean coffee, which we've yet to find conclusive evidence. And it's entirely for lack of looking.
Yeah.
So more on that later.
More on our lack of professionalism later.
Yep. Okay. So blade grinders have these little thin metal deals that basically swivel really, really fast through the beans, and they slice the beans
Kind of like a blender?
Yeah, a little bit, like a mini blender. And then burr grinders basically have these sort of like toothy gears that all the beans have to pass through, and it allows a uniform size to come through. And so it crushes.
So our church one is like that one.
Yes.
And then probably like your homemade quick one that's $8 at Bed Bath & Beyond is probably the blade grinder.
So that's part of the issue with burr grinders. In automatic, electric one is going to cost a lot.
Yeah.
Like minimum $50.
Did they make it
all the way up to an incredible amount of money. They do make hand crank. I haven't tried them. I don't know how well they work. But I've thought about picking one up for like being on the road or camping or something. So basically, the blade grinder is cheap and it's fast. Takes about like 10 seconds maybe to do like half a pot worth of coffee. But something in the way that the blade actually cuts the bean is less effective at like releasing flavor. So it's not really recommended at all. If you can afford a burr grinder, that's the way to go.
Oh, interesting.
So the blades will give you an uneven grind. So then it's just weird when it percolates. And it's hard to do for like French press because you can't get whereas with a burr grinder, you can set the size of the deal that you grind. So burr grinder is almost an automatic if you're going to do a French press. Burr grinders are slow. Yep. Because all the beans have to go through the same tiny little space, and if you don't get them all, then they'll spin around again and come back through. Yeah. So they're loud and they're slow, but flavor-wise, they're worth it.
Now, I'm thinking about like traditionally, if you're going to make, we didn't have, let's say, this is a natural element, the bean. There was probably, have you looked into at all, like just mashing them with mallets is like, right. That would seem like the most like, not caveman approach, but the most natural way
organic
of destroying the bean to be used for coffee is.
Yeah, I would assume that like a mortar and pestle would do the trick. Yeah. I guess I haven't looked into it. It would be so tedious.
Oh man, wouldn't it?
But maybe it would still be uneven. Yeah. It would take way longer than either of the other two options. But yes, if you want to go the super anti-technology route, you could try that out, I guess. Burr grinder is the way to go. Be prepared to pay a little bit for it, but actually, you and your wife gave me my burr grinder as a wedding present.
Yes.
And it's a Black & Decker. It's been running as long as we've been married, and it works great. So I think it comes from Target like $40-$50, something like that.
It was like $900. Just want to know how much.
Dang it.
Yeah.
That's the deal. If the recommended route is whole bean, roast it yourself. We'll talk more about that probably next time, and then use a burr grinder, and then however you want to brew is kind of up to you.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. All right. Well, I think that concludes it for John's Coffee Corner. That concludes it for a chit chat. Well, let's now enter into the fresh roast. All right, listeners, this is the fresh roast time, and today we have a special guest, Sara Heutink. Did I say it wrong? Heutink. I said it wrong again. Dang it. Sara Heutink. And I think I just etched that in my mind the wrong way, and so it's going to be really hard to get it out. Sara is going to talk with us today about singleness and Christendom and the Christian church. And Sara, I met you, it has to be probably about like 8 years ago.
At least.
About 8 years ago, maybe more. Probably at a church conference or a youth group conference at some point, and have worked with you with our church network and our youth retreats and youth events and different pastors' retreats and and you've been in full-time ministry. You recently just went and studied abroad at St. Andrews. And so why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit to our listening audience and about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get started.
Well, yeah. Well, like you said, I did some full-time youth ministry right out of college, 2 different churches. Some crazy situations that were there. And ever since then, for the most part, I've been doing volunteer ministry. I've been working primarily with City Hill Church down in the city. And then a little over a year ago now, I had the awesome and amazing opportunity to study at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and just today officially graduated with my second master's degree in this one in scripture and theology.
Wow.
So it's just amazing to go there and study with some of the top people in their field. The school is currently ranked #1 for scripture and theology studies.
Oh, I'm crazy jealous of you right now.
And then for any of the golf fans out there, yes, it is the home of golf. And so, yes, I would, on a regular basis, get to go and walk the first original golf course in the world. Just
oh, man.
spend an afternoon. Pretty amazing there.
Wow, cool. So what made you go do the second master's degree, this time in scripture and theology at St. Andrews?
Well, I was working for a company called JDT, and they were going through some changes, and I knew that I was going to be being laid off of the job. My job was going to be downsized. Simultaneously with that, I had been thinking about going back to school, getting another degree. I do like to study a lot of stuff, and had some encouragement, one from a close friend of mine. Her name's Nyla, and she just said, you need to be going back to school and studying and getting a PhD and be teaching and training people in ministry. And a couple of months after that, we actually had prophetic gatherings at City Hill, and Ben Goodman actually gave me a prophetic word about going back to really overseas. Scotland and the UK has always been the one country I have been interested in living in overseas.
Cool.
And he had no idea about that and gave me a prophetic word about that. And so when I did some research and saw what options were out there for schools and what I was eligible to go to, what I could qualify to go to, St. Andrews, I was eligible to go to with my previous degrees, and applied and got accepted and got my visa with 2.5 weeks to spare, and flew off to Scotland with 2.5 weeks official notice at the end of last summer.
Wow. So what are you doing now then?
Right now, I am working at Ingham Okoboji Bible Camp. It is a Bible camp ministry in Northwest position, so anything and everything to do with registration. Okay. And then just jumping in, it's Bible camp and ministry. You jump in anywhere and everywhere where you're needed. Sure. We just had a crafting retreat that I did the devotionals for, where part of us are talking about revamping our senior high ministry, senior high Bible camp ministry. So just getting to know people and getting reconnected into community and getting connected back into people that are doing ministry, and just getting kind of dipping my toe back into full-time ministry in a way.
Sure. Cool. All right. Well, to the topic at hand, singles, the church, how good, how bad, how ugly the church is loving on, incorporating with, encouraging and developing singles in the church. And I saw this article by John Acuff. It's a score sheet, Surviving Church as a Single Score Sheet. And there are a number of, I asked you to kind of look through it. I think there are like 40 questions. And it gives you like a point. It's kind of humorous. It's trying to be, but there's also some real life, real things that are going on in here that are pain points, especially I think both for singles and for the church. And it was kind of jokingly kind of giving scores of how like bad things would be if, you got someone asked you this question or whatever. I asked you to go through it. What stood out to you? You relay some of the questions that really kind of stood out to you. And I'll ask you a couple of ones that kind of stood out to me if you don't hit those too. So go ahead. What were some of the things that kind of jumped out at you that were like, yep, I got those points. That's on my scorecard?
Well, the first few just talk about your church, even if it has a singles ministry and what it is, which I just kind of had to chuckle about because there's a lot of churches that just, I don't know, they just have no idea of what being single is like. And so you have all these married people trying to do single ministry, and and especially in smaller churches, which the vast majority of the churches in the U.S. are actually the smaller churches. You know, they have 10 people that are single, but, you know, 2 of them are college students that still live at home, and one of them, you know, 60 and a widower, and 2 of them are divorced, and 3 of them are just in their 30s and professional adults, and they try to lump them all together, and it's like, you just can't. You're at totally different life stages there. And so it's just really interesting for churches to try and do that. So I feel like I've had all of those types of single groups at different times.
Yeah, so like one of the questions is, your church has a singles ministry, but it's combined with the college ministry, which creates opportunities for conversations like this. Student, my roommate bought a microwave for our dorm room. I love being a freshman. Single, my 401k is underperforming. So yeah, there's not much room for conversation at those different life stages.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely do ministry together there, but that's a opportunity for a mentoring/mentee relationship much more than it is for a meeting at the same life stage trying to figure out God kind of relationship. So I think, you know, one of the things that I think the church just really underestimates is how valuable life stages are for people, especially once you get about beyond the age of about 25 when you're doing ministry. I fit much better with people that are about my same age, even if they are married and with kids, because we are thinking about jobs, and we're thinking about home ownership, and we have car payments, and we have aging parents now. Whereas you put me with someone who is 21, 22, I can have a great conversation with them, but they are struggling to figure out God in a very different way in their life. And who they are and their identity in Christ. So it's just, there's a lot of value to focusing on the stage of life that you're in rather than the status of your relationship.
It's good. I haven't thought of it that way. That's good.
I do. Number 5 was one. It says, someone pays you the world's most backhanded compliment. I just don't understand how someone as great as you isn't married yet. And it is probably one of comments that are similar to that are probably one of the most backhanded compliments to experience. Oh, you're so wonderful and you're so great. And it's like, oh, okay, so who would you set me up with? I don't know. You know, it's just, well, if I'm so wonderful and I'm so great, then, you know, and the reward for that is to be married.
Yeah, like why is that automatic? Like, can great people not have a partner? Like, is like, oh, if you are a great person, therefore you obviously will attract another person and you will experience life together. That's a requirement for great people.
Well, it's just the whole mindset that I run into a lot that I don't think a lot of married people even realize how much they kind of have the mindset, but that marriage is almost a reward for being faithful to God, or being mature in your Christian relationship. So I've heard a lot of, oh, you know, God will bring someone when you're ready. You're just not mature enough yet in your faith to handle a marriage relationship. And I'm looking at a lot of people, no offense,
man. I think
married in the church, and I'm going,
points for hearing those.
I'm way more mature than you. If maturity is a sign, then I should have probably been married when I was 14, because I've always been someone who's always been said, yeah, you're really mature for your age and in your faith. And yet it seems to be that so often a marriage relationship is equated with being mature in your faith, or being faithful enough to God, or trusting God enough, sort of a reward for being a good Christian. And so that kind of backhanded compliment of that always kind of comes back to that oh, I didn't know I was working for a reward there. I didn't know I was so lacking in that.
Do you then feel like the church is unknown of their own hypocrisy of how, well, if you're mature, you're going to have a spouse, or if you're more mature, you will have a spouse. Yet looking at people who have spouses, easily going and saying, wow, I am way more mature than these people are. They're spiraling towards destruction of not just one, but two people's lives. I mean, have you felt that and seen that?
I have seen that a lot, but I mean, how do you say that as someone who's a single and going without being like, oh, look at me, I'm so mature.
Yeah.
Like then you get caught into that as well. But yeah, there are a lot of times where I've seen that, where it's like, okay, so I can acknowledge that you are figuring out life with somebody, and that's different. That's a different kind of maturity. I can acknowledge that you're a parent, and that's a different kind of maturity. But that doesn't automatically make you overall more mature or more spiritual or more holy than I am as a single person.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that there needs to be a recognition that there's different kinds of maturity. There's different kinds of spirituality, but one kind doesn't automatically become more important or more spiritual than another kind, or more mature than another kind. And that each kind has a validity and has a value to it. And that we need to start recognizing that value that's there to learn from each other and our experiences, rather than trying to one-up each other in our experiences in life.
So do you think that there's a higher pressure level in the church to find a spouse than there is like in the world, or are there similar pressures in the world? And if they're different, how are they different? And I guess, like, do you prefer church pressure or world pressure?
I definitely think that there is way more pressure, at least from a female perspective, to be married in the church.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't speak from the male perspective, but I think from the female perspective, there really is. And part of that is if you look at women's Bible studies, women's spiritual growth materials, basically the women's book section in any Christian bookstore, 90% of it is how to be a good wife and a mother.
Wow.
Well, that's all you're called to be, right?
The fastest way to turn me off of any women's ministry program is to have a material or a speaker say, as a woman, my highest calling in life is to be a wife and a mother.
Oh,
and I want to say, no, your highest calling is to do what God has called you to. And maybe that is being a wife and a mother.
Yeah.
But just because you are a female does not mean that is automatically your highest calling.
Yeah. Wow,
so definitely for women in the church, there's a lot more pressure than in the world. In general, in the world, I think once you get beyond the age of 30, people just kind of assume you're a career woman. And they just the pressure kind of lessens and goes off a lot after about the age of 30. Somewhere in your 20s, there's still a lot of, you're going to find the one and, get going and get started on your family young.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're working into your 30s, people kind of say, you're focusing on your career. You'll get around to it someday. That's really cool. You can have all these life experiences. And then in general, in the world, women can have a voice in our society today. Women can be CEOs, they can be doctors, they can be bosses. They have a voice that is equal to a man's voice. But a lot of the times in the church, they do not. And I guess I would challenge you to think about your elder board at church and who advocates on behalf of a single 30-something, 40-something-year-old woman in your church. And for most churches, your elder board or your leadership team are all men.
Yeah.
And they say, we listen to women because you're married. You listen to a married woman's perspective. You listen to your wife's perspective. But if I have a real concern about what's going on in the church, how is my voice heard to the same power as a male elder and or his wife?
Wow, great question.
In a church.
Yeah, it almost like it perpetuates itself because the only voices that are being heard are either married voices or male voices. So yeah, I think that's really insightful that the single women probably don't have as much of an advocate in the church, and therefore are sort of the odd ones out when it comes to policy and programs and whatever. And then, it's an awkward fit.
Yeah, 3-year-olds and babies who need their butts changed get more time and consideration than single women do. Nothing against babies who need their butt changed, but they can probably be lower on the scale.
Do you see that changing at all? I don't know how much of a variety of churches you've seen as far as like different genders in leadership and all that kind of stuff. Do you still see it where like if there is a female pastor, she's still married, or have you seen maybe an increase in acceptance of single female leaders in the church?
I think if you're talking church overall, big picture worldwide, there is slowly but surely becoming more of an acceptance of women in leadership positions, having voices, especially married women, going back again to the assuming that marriage means maturity.
Yeah.
That I think that holds true for men, and it seems to be holding true for women who are coming into leadership positions as well. I think it's interesting that oftentimes what are considered the more traditional churches seem to be more open to women in ministry. Maybe not as the ordained senior pastor of a church, but in general on pastoral staff. I think, for example, my 4 years of professional ministry in the Catholic Church, and the vast majority of Catholic youth ministers and faith formation coordinators are women. And there were lots of single women that I knew and were in networks with, where in working with the TrueBridge network of churches, not a single one of them was.
Wow.
It's that's a really interesting dynamic, I guess, if you say. The camp that I'm working at now is officially associated as an ELCA Lutheran camp.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really interesting to see how many women are calling in as the pastors or the senior pastors or the youth pastors of a church. And it's a 50-50 shot when a church calls. Is their leadership person going to be a woman, or is it going to be a man?
Yeah.
Senior pastors, youth pastors, so women are definitely in these more traditional churches, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. Women are definitely more well represented on a pastoral staff than they are in what are typically seen as the more non-traditional and progressive churches.
Sure, yeah.
At least in my experience.
So what role did you play at the TrueBridge Church, and what was your interaction then? You're saying like there were no other women involved in all of the, essentially there are dozens of churches in that network. And now going back and thinking about like the pastors' retreats and stuff like that, yeah, there's not. You were the only woman leader essentially there. That wasn't just your leadership position title was wife of other leader. So what roles? What did you? How was that like essentially breaking a barrier within the TrueBridge Church? Like how did that become that you were in a leadership position?
Yeah, well, for the TrueBridge network, for about 10 years, I coordinated the that they do every year in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
And I got into that role the very first year that it was done. One of my greatest friends in the world, Mark Haugen, initially started that retreat. And I just remember he called me and he said, "Sarah, I did something crazy." I was like, what'd you do now, Mark? Because anybody who knows Mark knows
what'd you do now?
Stuff all the time. And he said, well, I volunteered to run a youth retreat. I said, that's great. Youth retreats are awesome. He goes, but I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what I'm doing. And will you come help me? And so I came and I helped him do the very first one. And then I did my first graduate degree for 4 years. And then after that was done, I was in a point in life where I was looking to get back into doing something along those lines. And he said, I need your help. We're at a growth point where we need to change some things, but I just don't know what to change. And so I came back in, and then when he and his wife, Anna, stepped out of that, I became the primary person that did a lot of the work for that. So that's kind of how I fell into that role by relationship and working with Mark ever since I was a student there at Morris. And I think one of the things that was just really, really interesting for me is at one point being told that I was really great at doing the administrative stuff, but I didn't have a vision for the retreat. And that was probably the hardest point for me with the True Bridge retreat and knowing what was going on there. And there's some great people that are working with it now. And I'm really glad to see that it had continued, even though I've stepped out of the True Bridge network now, having gone to Scotland and now being down in Iowa where there aren't any True Bridge churches.
Yeah.
But it was really odd the first couple of years, especially to go to that retreat, specifically in January, to build relationships and to get to know the people that were working with the youth in the various churches. And I was very, very conscious and very, very aware that I was not only there as a female, but also as an unmarried person in that circle. And over the years, there have been a couple of other people who have been there as singles and not married. But I have been, to my knowledge, the only one that has ever been to that retreat as a female and unmarried.
Wow.
And so after the first couple of years, I built relationships with enough people that I wasn't as aware of it. But those first couple of years, I was extremely aware of just being a woman and being single in that group. And very conscious and cautious about what I was saying to make sure I wasn't stepping on any toes and to make sure that I was just limiting myself to building relationships with the youth workers that were there at that particular retreat.
That's interesting. That was where I was kind of going to go and ask, like, how did being aware of your essentially segregated status, like you were the only one of us, you were in a minority essentially in a group of people, how did that affect your behavior within that group? I mean, you were saying you were just more aware of what you would say and how you would say it as to not step on people's toes. I mean, could you feel like you really couldn't be yourself for a while until you built relationships?
Very much so. And people who get to know me well, it's funny because people who don't know me well say that I'm really quiet. But those who do know me, where I am comfortable, are like, really? Because you can't really actually get her to shut up. I mean, there's a lot of people there in that group that probably still believe me to be a very, very quiet, reserved person because I just have never felt comfortable enough that I could open up around them.
Wow.
So yeah, when I'm in a situation where I'm very aware of that, I'm very quiet and I observe a lot and really try to get as much of the lay of the land as possible before I start letting my personality come out. And even then, I'm still very cautious in a lot of circles like True Bridge to share that, hey, I did work 4 years in Catholic youth ministry. And I have a youth ministry degree, but it's from a Catholic university. It's from St. John.
Yeah.
I am very aware that even just that denominational difference can be really hard in certain circles to swallow. And vice versa. The reverse goes true when I'm in Catholic circles. I'm very conscious to of how I talk about my charismatic experiences as well.
Sure. Yeah. You're
not
not going
to
to
be
healing
just
retreat anytime
add
soon.
being a woman onto that, and it can be really challenging at times.
Wow. Go ahead.
So.
I was just going to ask, do you think that our perception of marriage and our I guess our need to be married truly stems from like biblical ideas, or is it more like just the environment now that we're brought up in, especially in the church? Like, I guess how have your views on
That's a really
marriage
interesting point to bring up.
changed, like from growing up? Maybe were you saved like from a younger age, and like kind of with these expectations and then examining the Bible for itself, or do you find your views change kind of the longer that you are single, and it's sort of like, well, this is where I'm at, so I guess I have to believe, so where are you at in your journey?
Well, I grew up going to an evangelical free church. I grew up in an interesting dynamic in that my mom was the one who always took us to church, and then my dad went to Catholic Mass. So my parents didn't take us to church together, my siblings and myself. But I did go up going to church for as long as I can remember, going to Bible camp every summer. And I grew up with the expectation that I just would be married someday. Like when someone asked, what are you doing when you're going to be 30? Well, I was going to have a great career and a house and a car and a dog and 3 kids and a husband.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that's just what the expectation was. I think when I got into college, one of the things I just really realized about myself is that I needed to learn a lot about myself. And I was like, what? I'm not mature enough to be dating. I barely know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I often say I didn't feel like I knew myself well enough to even consider dating or serious relationships until I was in my early 30s. And I just marvel at people who can be married in their early 20s, because I look at who I was in my early 20s, and in so many ways I'm such a different person, because you just grow up a lot in your 20s.
Yep.
I'm just like, I don't know how I would have done that, being married to another person and possibly having kids as well. I think one of the things that was really interesting to me as far as studying in belief is my dissertation for this last degree that I just finished was looking at the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church. That's 3 official documents that the Catholic Church put out, and I looked at the documents that came out as part of written by Saint Bonaventure. So that was written in about 1200, I believe. And he wrote a thing called the Breviloquium, which is a brief summary of the theology to give out to priests and to train them to go out into the local communities to teach about the church and the sacraments. And then he was a contemporary of St. Thomas Aquinas, to put it in timeline. And then I also wrote, compared that, how he treated the sacraments to how the sacraments were treated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which came out just after the Council of Trent, which was right around the time of the Reformation.
Okay.
And then I compared that to the current Catechism of the Catholic Church, which came out officially around the late 80s, early 90s. And that came out in response to the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. It was really interesting to me because historically, the sacrament of marriage, like, it's barely considered a sacrament for many centuries in the church. And yet today it is one of the most celebrated parts about being in the Christian church. And historically, up until the last 100 to 200 years, it's actually been much more celebrated and considered much more holy and much more spiritually mature to be single and to dedicate your life to the service of the church rather than to get married. It was exalted to maintain single. And specifically, the sacrament of marriage was established in the church as a fail-safe for those who couldn't keep lust under control. You were lacking in self-control if you felt you had to be married.
Well, I mean, just even plain scripture reading. I mean, you kind of get that from Paul. The example of like if you can't hold on to your desires, then yes, get married. Just like just even in that small little phrase, you're like, oh, it's kind of like a fail. But you're saying even with that was the general feeling historically throughout the church.
Yep. Yes. And it's really interesting to go around countries like Italy and Ireland and some of those very historic Catholic countries and just see the absolutely, like Ireland especially was interesting for me to travel in while I was there. And there's these ruins that were just huge, huge, huge monasteries, monks or nuns, depending on your gender. And because that was what you did if you felt the call to ministry and to serve God, is you went into a monastery and you studied and you served from those places. And the reason there were so many is because they were full and they had to keep building them. And a couple hundred would live at each one of these. And then you drive like 10 miles down the road, and then there was another one that used to house a couple hundred.
Wow.
And then a few more, another 10, 20 miles down the road, there's another one that housed a couple hundred. And different circumstances have caused a lot of those to be abandoned now, especially Ireland with famines and droughts and whatnot. But it's just really interesting to go around the countryside and see how much of that really was the culture. Until, when you think about the grand scheme of Christian history being 2,000 years, it's actually really recent that marriage has been such an emphasis within the Christian church.
So how does the Christian church kind of rebalance itself? Like what things do you see are some steps that in general, like the evangelical church or the charismatic church or even the Catholic church, that needs to happen in order to kind of rebalance the focus of the importance of being a single individual in the community?
I think one of the first things to do is to really focus on what people have to offer as individuals that has absolutely no dependence on their marital status. I think one of the interesting things that I heard once and has really stuck with me is that in 1 Corinthians, when they're talking about spiritual gifts, it says to some are given and to others are given. And there's nothing there that equates the gift to a relationship status or to a gender.
Sure.
And yet, if you think about, to some are given the gift of preaching. Well, in so many churches, the only opportunity to preach is if you're a guy. And even then, we would really prefer you to be a married guy.
Yeah.
And so we just automatically limit the people who could possibly have that gift to a certain gender or relationship status. It doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So I think it would be just getting back to a place where we can focus on and celebrate a gifting of someone and help them encourage and express that in the best way for their personality, and stop focusing so much on letting gender or relationship status influence that. And then I think that would be a really key thing right there. I also think that the other thing is to make sure that everyone in your church has an equal voice. Like what we were talking about earlier, on your leadership team, on your pastoral team, is there someone who is truly advocating for your singles in your church?
Yeah.
And not just your single college students because you have a young adult ministry, but your singles of any age and stage in life. Are you advocating for the single mom, the single parent, as much as you're advocating for families in general? Are you advocating for your single young professionals as much as you are trying to focus on your college-age ministry?
Yeah.
And I guess that every church has a different dynamic in a different congregation. in a different community that they are ministering to. But I can guarantee you that if your church is healthy, you have at least a couple of people that are in a similar situation to me, in that they're in their 30s and their 40s, don't have kids, that probably are feeling like they would stop and think about it, especially is that they don't have a voice in your church leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So who's going and advocating for them? If you're not a church that believes in women as elders, then how are you making sure that their voices are heard? I'm not saying that you automatically have to go and put women on your elder team, or that you have to consider a woman for your senior pastor, but you do have to make sure that their voices are heard equally to every other voice in your church, that you're listening to them. So I think those would probably be the two biggest things for me.
Wow, cool. Yeah, I read that in a Barnum study that it said widow adults are the most active in a range of religious pursuits, and the never been married individuals ranked lowest. And I think that it probably, like what John was saying, what you were saying about the self-perpetual condition of the church, is that if we only continue to listen to the voices of married individuals, then never been married individuals are going to continue to be heard less, interact less, give less, volunteer less, and engage less. So.
Yep. Yeah, my saving grace of being involved in a church is that I just really found a great niche at City Hill in being involved in their youth ministry through Nate Street, who was there at the time, who really just was really gifted at being able to call out the giftings in a person and work to enable those giftings to be expressed to the best of the ability of the framework that he had to work within, and chances to teach and preach with the youth group. And he gave me chances to coordinate mission trips and just really be involved with the worship team, the youth worship team, for a couple of years, and to help with training of youth staff and just all that sort of stuff. He gave me the chances to do. So I really felt like I was valued there. I felt like my voice was heard within that ministry. And so I stayed there, and I was super crazy active in that ministry. Had I not felt that my voice was heard within that ministry, I would have either found a different ministry within City Hill, or I would have found a different church.
Yeah. Wow.
So.
All right. Well, before we let you go, I would say, is there any final words of wisdom, either to singles, like a message out to the singles who are listening, or to married individuals or peoples in church, just to be here's your takeaway, be thinking about this one thing to help change the culture a little bit? Because it seems like it's a culture problem. We have maybe a theology problem too. And it just, they all blur together in our attitude towards how we kind of treat one another and how we perceive one another, with these backhanded comments of things that you've heard, and, oh, don't worry, you'll find the right one, you just need to be faithful, and all these different things because of the misconceptions. And what's something you would say to kind of talk to either encourage the singles or roast the married people who don't
Well, I guess I would say to single people to not let yourself be silenced, to speak up and to make your voice heard as far as what is encouraging to you, what support that you need from your church if you're going through a hard time, to actively reach out and build community wherever you're at with church, and to really build community. I mean, singles can be just as guilty as married people, I think, and so build community. Go over to the houses of the people that are married with kids, and be okay with the loud, noisy dinner time table, and just realize that relationship is valuable, and don't let it be ignored, and don't let your married people just put you on the back burner until it's convenient. I think you have to learn to be an advocate for yourself. I hope and pray someday that all single people don't have to be that, but that's what I'm telling single people now, is you really do have to learn to be an advocate for yourself. And I guess I would say to married people is, just because we're not married, so, I know you can fall into that habit of getting together with other married couples to commiserate their kids and the flu that's gone around or whatever it is. But invite the single people over to dinner every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Call them up every once in a while and just say, hey, thinking of you. Hope life is going great if you haven't heard from them for a while. Like, just be aware that there are single people out there. And if you don't have any single friends, you've fallen into the couple bubble.
Couple bubble. Ooh, I like it.
And then also, I guess I would just say, be aware of the language that you use as a married person.
What are good things to avoid?
In a good marriage, your spouse truly is a blessing in your life.
Yeah.
But your life is also, or should be more, than your marriage and your kids. And let the single people kind of hold you accountable about more than your spouse and your kids, and maintaining a bigger perspective to your world. I think that's probably one of the greatest things that having single friends can offer to married couples.
Cool.
So
awesome. Anything else, Johnny?
I think we got it.
I think we got it. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and helping John and I, who are probably in the couple bubble.
Oh, yeah. Couple bubble since, high school.
To try to, see outside the bubble and appreciate and try to grab hold of the singles and making sure that their gifts and voices are expressed in the church and love on them the way they should be loved. Marriage is not the only gift in the church. There are other gifts, and not to be thinking like that's the only gift. And if you don't have that gift, then obviously you're not a Christian enough type person. So thanks for joining us on the Roasted Christian Podcast. And anything else? Be wary of some feedback. We're gonna hopefully engage people to feedback on Facebook and stuff. So you might have to answer some questions. So
that would be fine.
Wonderful.
So thanks for having me, guys.
Right, thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, Sarah, thank you again. And listeners, I hope that sparks some of your interest, not just interest, but just your mind in thinking about where have I been either excluding singles in my community, in my church setting, in just how I talk. Hopefully this will hopefully open up some of those things you haven't been thinking about, and to engage more with singles in our church community. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give you a heads up. I'm going to be putting a blog post up on a recipe that Whitney and I experimented with last night for an adult hot chocolate. We had homemade hot chocolate with a little tequila, a little brandy, a little cinnamon, and a little Cool Whip. So we're going to put a little bit of the recipe up on a blog post. You should check it out. Both of us, when we drank it, we looked at each other and went, "Ooh, that was warm." It was quite tasty. So we'll throw that up onto the blog post on roastedchristian.com. So check that out. And I think that's it for today. John, got anything else?
I mean, if you don't think we have minorities in the church, we probably do, and we're just not aware of them. And those would be singles. Single women.
That's a good
not
point.
Single college kids.
Yep. Yeah, they aren't. Yeah, not the same thing. No,
yep.
They are, but they're not.
Yeah, slightly different category.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind. Be aware.
That's good. All right. Well, this has been the Roasted Christian Podcast. I'm Bobby.
I'm John.
Thanks for listening.
You're welcome.